Take a sec.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Destination the Show. This is episode 46, the Underwhelming Trade Deadline Edition. My name is Jamie Cameron. This week, I'm not joined by Jeremy Nygaard, but rather Theo Tollefson, an immediate upgrade. Dude, how are you?
Oh, we're calling me an upgrade. Okay. Well, you can dispense with the flattery, I guess, because we got to get into this. I mean, here's the thing. 2 of the 3 teams we cover did pretty okay this trade deadline, but the one we both know the best, we cover the most, write about the most. Yeah, it went exactly as we predicted, but it's still extremely underwhelming and like, come on, man. That's the reaction.
Straight down to it. Okay, well, we are going to jump in as we kind of previewed a little bit last week on the draft recap show. We are going to dig into some trade deadline coverage here. We'll jump in and cover the Twins first because there's probably the least to talk about, and then we'll jump into the Brewers and the Cubs. We'll get some we'll kind of outline what they did, and we'll pitch Theo some kind of hopefully thought provoking questions about each team's strategy, about the guys they may have gone after or not gone after, and then we'll wrap it up. And from there, we'll be back into prospect coverage for these minor league systems moving forward. So I'm excited to chop it up with you, man.
Yeah.
All right, should we do this? Should we jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with the Minnesota Twins. As you alluded to right off the bat, a pretty underwhelming trade deadline for them. Their lone trade, they acquired right-handed pitcher Trevor Richards from the Toronto Blue Jays in exchange for utility minor leaguer Jay Harry. Harry was drafted in the 2023 draft. One note I wanted to make there. His slot value was $322,000. He signed for $175,000, so he was a decently money saving pick that allowed them some flexibility at the time. So let's start with this trade, Theo, and then we'll like zoom out to their overall approach. What are your thoughts on the Richards acquisition?
Well, I was at our lovely Twins Daily Watch party on Tuesday night over at Beckett's, and right as I got there towards the end of the deadline, I was talking with our lovely owners, Nick Nelson and John Bonus, about this, and I liken this trade a lot to what happened at the trade deadline in 2015 for the Twins, where unexpectedly they were buyers, but they didn't do much except get Kevin Jepsen from the Tampa Bay Rays, and I can't remember who did they give up for him again. Not too much, if I remember right. They traded Alexis Tapia, some guy who never played in the majors.
Yep.
So, that's what this kind of feels like. I mean, you did the bare minimum. You got that one extra reliever, and Trevor Richards, his big thing is his reverse splits versus lefties, which I mean, it can plug some holes, but is he going to be better than Steven Okert was against Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper just a week ago? Yeah, I don't know if I would trust him in those types of situations now. Hopefully that doesn't end up being the case in the best of case scenarios where they would have to face them again this season. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's passable. It patches a few things, but just not enough, It's just putting that duct tape over a big hole in the boat.
Yep, for sure. So before we jump into the Twins' approach overall, and I think, we speculated ahead of the deadline, both like offline and kind of on the show, that this was potentially going to be a really quiet deadline for the Twins, just like last year's deadline. Let me ask you this, because corresponding move today, unfortunately, Brock Stewart went back on the IL. Seems like he is not right. Velo was down, got roughed up a little bit in a few appearances back with the major league team. If Brock Stewart hadn't been injured, do you think they would have made this trade at all? Or would they have put up a big offer at the deadline? What are your thoughts? Is this just a
No
injury move, or do you think they feel like this is legitimately adding depth?
I think they would have got him because we still don't know what we're gonna see from Topa once he reaches the major league level, because they kind of have been relying on him as one of those additional unofficial trade acquisition moves where
Mhm.
he's going to be back and available at the beginning of August. And by my estimations, he pitched, I think, last night, as in Tuesday night, for the Saints, had a scoreless inning. I would not be surprised if, at the very latest, he joins the team when they go to Chicago next week to face off against the Cubs, which
Mhm.
it's helpful, but at the same time, I mean, he's foregoing surgery he's going to eventually need on his knee to just kind of push himself through the end of the season. So we don't know what could happen there, and that's
Mhm.
why you need a Trevor Richards, no matter what was going to be seen from Brock Stewart or what we will potentially be seeing from Justin Topa.
Yep.
So there's collateral there a bit, but
Yep.
yeah, not enough. I mean, you can never have too many relief arms, but just getting one is better than none, but it's still only getting one.
For sure, and that's a great point on Topa. Theo is the most plugged in person you will find to the St. Paul Saints. Got you covered on all of that over at Twins Daily. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the Twins' approach as a whole. Theo, this is the second year in a row that they've had almost no action at the trade
Mhm,
deadline. Obviously, we heard that they were in the mix for starting arms. Kikuchi was one, Flaherty was potentially another. There were some rumblings about some creative trading potentially with the Yankees for Nestor Cortez. Um, the Twins have left themselves with a pretty fine margin for error with the starting rotation. If anyone gets hurt, if anyone is particularly ineffective. Are you surprised that they did not jump more aggressively into the rental starting pitcher sweepstakes? And what's your take on this deadline as a whole, whether that's from like an interested fan or a kind of
mhm.
team building sustainability perspective?
Well, we saw how much Kikuchi went for just a rental. I
Mhm.
mean, the prospects that they were gonna have to give up, I mean, Luke Keeschel was 100% going to be asked for by Toronto. We don't know that for sure, but just looking at what the Astros had to give up, that was going to be a very likely possibility, and he would have been one of the only he probably would have been one of the few top 100 consensus prospects to be moved if the Twins had really
Mhm.
went all in. But uh, I don't know if you read this too. Dan Hayes had an article, I think it was last night, on, you know, they set the tone for this setup, like this being what they would do back in November when these payroll limitations went in. Now, we can gripe all we want about these billionaires who will really lose nothing kicking in that extra 30 million to ensure you're going to have the most competitive team to rebuild after your best postseason run in 21 years.
Mhm.
So it is a ridiculous amount of cheapness attached to it, and they're living up to the title that they kind of. I know Joe Polat from my question of the time I asked him when they signed Correa at the press conference. I was like, does this kind of remove that cheap Polad connotation to your name? And he laughed it off and was like, yeah, a little bit. And then not even a year later, they're back to it. So it's
Yeah.
frustrating because the team's competing, they're doing well. And I think it would be a little less frustrating if Cleveland and Kansas City, A, weren't as good as they are right now, and B,
Mhm.
weren't so aggressive at the trade deadline. That would be another thing. Now, I will say this is more than what we saw last year because, I mean, Dylan Floro for Jorge Lopez was really just two bad relievers needing a change of location, and that didn't
Mhm.
really help either of them. And then, of course, Dylan Floro goes to the Nationals, has a great first half, and gets traded to Arizona. So that's just how baseball works sometimes. So I will say it's a half step up for that,
Yep. Half
but
step
it's
up
still
from
not
that.
great.
Still not great. Agree with you 100% there, and your point is a good one, man. I mean, the AL wild card, obviously the Central is vastly, vastly improved for the pitiful division it was in 2023, but the AL wild card is turning into a real dogfight now.
Mhm,
Seattle, Boston, Kansas City, someone is going to miss out, and it is very notable the day after the trade deadline that all of those contending teams around the Twins made moves to get better, and they are
mhm.
one of the few teams that really did the lowest kind of wattage thing possible. So how do you see their postseason chances stacking up? Do you still feel confident that they're gonna secure and wrap up one of these wild card positions? Do you think they're more under threat based on the moves that other teams made? What's your read on that, man?
I mean, Kansas City for sure put pressure on them, just being like right on their heels in the division and in the wild card spots to really just be like, okay, pressure's on. They still have two series against Cleveland and just
Mhm.
two against Kansas City as well. So like those aren't really going to be what decides the division. So yeah, I again, if Kansas City, especially because I was talking them down all
We all
season.
were for sure, right?
Yeah, we're like, "This is ridiculous." Like, they'll be better than 56 wins for sure, but, like, more than 70, 75, I don't know, but it looks like they will now. So,
Mhm.
I mean, the toughest part of the Twins' schedule that likely remains is, um, their last second to last week in the season where they got 4 on the road to finish up against Cleveland and then
Mhm.
3 against Boston that weekend. So, I mean, in terms of competitiveness, the schedule's looking a little more in their favor. They do have 3 series run against some National League teams that are in postseason contention with the Padres, Cardinals, and Braves at the end of August, which is going to be here so much sooner than we expect. So,
Yep.
I mean, so much will happen between now and then. It's just very hard to say, but you're going to have to be so much more dependent on David Festa, who looked brilliant last night. I mean,
Yep.
not brilliant, but like he did
It
his
looked
part.
good.
The offense didn't show up.
Yep.
Um, Varlin will likely be back maybe for a start or two. If not, he probably is going to find himself in a similar role to what he was doing last season. Um, and you can only make so many moves of taking guys on and off the 40-man roster, which has already done so many this season. But unfortunately, looking at the roster before we started recording this, I'm like, oh, everyone's happy to see Dobnak back, but he's probably going to be the guy taking off the 40-man once Topa's off the 60-day IL. So
Mhm. And I'm so I'm gonna ask you another, just kind of how you see this playing out long term. But it's such a tough assessment to make about the Twins' approach to this deadline because I think most most fans that apply some degree of nuance to the situation, which I'd like to think that we do, can agree that we can squarely point blame at ownership for the conditions that the front office now has to operate in, right? Slashing payroll by 30 million and
yeah,
so on and so forth. My wondering, and I'm curious for your take on it, right? Is um, the messaging has been revenue is down, whether that's TV revenue, ticket sales apparently haven't been what they expected. Um, But I wonder, and I am worried that we're gonna be in this kind of echo chamber, chicken or the egg scenario, right? Where ownership doesn't invest either in terms of money, or payroll each year. As a result, fans continue to lose interest. I'm curious how it impacts players in the clubhouse, whether they feel disenfranchised by the lack of effort made to improve the quality of the club. And I'm worried that, like, year on year, is this just something that continues to go around in this kind of chaotic cycle, right? Of there's less revenue because fans are less interested. Ownership continues to cut payroll. Do you think that is something that's going to continue on past this season? What do you think the outlook is for like 2025 and beyond?
I don't want to go beyond just 2025 at this point. I think there's going to, I mean, there will be changes in the whole television situation. I mean,
True.
people are finally going to be able to start watching games on Comcast, but that also comes with getting their most expensive cable package, which, it's a price gouge. They're trying to exploit
Brutal.
us. And that's the thing. I mean, I I'm just trying to think the best way to put this. I mean, ownership's like our hands are tied with the money we're committing to this team. We can't commit any more. What do you want us to do about it? And we're screaming, commit more. You're one of the richest families in Major League Baseball. A few extra 25 million even is not going to bankrupt the poll ads as far as we know. But you know. So I think that's the thing. Like a good portion of what they're setting this payroll at for next season is going to be made up of on Carlos Correa and Pablo Lopez alone. I think
Hmm.
Correa is going to have 30 some million, and then Pablo Lopez is finally going to be earning 20 some million on top of that. Now, they are super fortunate to have the farm system they do right now with all these prospects coming through to not really have to pay some of these guys more than the major league minimum, but some of these guys are going to start earning arbitration. That will be the likes of Trevor Larnach, Joe Ryan. They're going to get a
Mhm.
little more expensive, and you can't just keep going through the bare minimum. And we've been so fortunate with what we've seen for Simeon Woods Richardson, but will he regress next season? I mean, he regressed the other night. He was going to have a bad start eventually. That's just
For
how
sure.
baseball works sometimes. But yeah, I mean, there's frustration all around.
Yeah, and I can't dude, something I'm having a hard time with personally is Polad's obviously incredibly business savvy family, otherwise they wouldn't be
Hmm.
as well off as they are, right? But
Yeah.
we knew the financial landscape that the TV situation was going to. We knew the TV contract was running out. You chose to invest in the Correa contract, and a lot of the sentiment that came from the ownership group at that time was, yes, like we want to compete financially, we want to raise payroll, and then to walk that back confuses me in terms of like, surely you could and should have seen this iceberg that is the TV situation coming a little bit more clearly right in front of you. That's been on the
Hmm.
horizon for a while. How did you guys fumble this so badly as to now have to kind of impose these conditions on this team that has an opportunity to win now and are not being permitted to improve around the margins for, quite honestly, what shouldn't be that expensive of an upgrade financially? Like, we heard at the deadline, a lot of teams did not want to take on extra money. If the
Mm.
Twins had been willing to do that with regard to a starting pitcher, I'm not saying you get a significant upgrade for the rotation and certainly not for the playoffs, but you do buy yourself significant margin for error in getting your starting pitchers to the postseason healthy. And we know that this team values depth. So it just has me questioning a little bit the kind of forecasting and the business sense making of the organization ahead of, in this uncertain TV landscape. Like, we knew this was happening. How do we not plan a little bit more proactively for this set of circumstances?
I really don't know how they couldn't have. I think they've tried to play things out as long as possible, and then I'd liken it to being at the racetrack. You're weighing all your options. You're overthinking, which horse you're going to put a bet on, and then you go to the last second. You know who you put your placement on, and then you things just don't work out. It could be the case of that horse doesn't even make it through the final track and collapses on itself there, and that's like I've seen that happen, and I at Canterbury Park, and that kind of feels like what the TV situation played out as. But
Hmm.
as of right now, I mean, they'll make it through this season, and we can't start panicking too much about the future yet. What we need to focus on as fans right now, and it sucks. I'm not saying don't be mad, don't have your frustrations, but like think about how to vent those properly so we
Hmm.
can potentially see the effective change we want to see within this franchise in terms of how it's run from the top down. But right now, I mean, we thought we were going to see a sweep by the Mets today. That didn't happen. They
Nope.
salvaged the bats. They woke themselves up. They could possibly send the White Sox to a 20-game losing streak by the end of this weekend.
That is
Um,
unbelievable. For two 14 plus game losing streaks in a season.
yeah, and they don't have Eloy Jimenez, who's hurt the Twins over the last few years, so it's good to see him gone at least.
Brutal.
But yeah,
A
it's a
how about
frustrating.
like a perfect run of health for Eloy Jimenez? Now he's out of the south side of Chicago. What do you think?
Oh, it's probably gonna happen. I mean, we have a lot of problems as Twins fans right now with how the franchise is being run, but at least we're not
Yes.
the White Sox.
Yes, this is great perspective, Theo. This is exactly what I needed. And I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody that the White Sox cannot draft higher than 10th in the 2025 MLB draft.
We'll be
Um,
bringing that up every week
every
for
opportunity.
the next year. So hang with us.
Every opportunity. All right, that's enough time for us to grumble about teams that did not do enough at the deadline. Although, before we jump into the Brewers, I do want to point out that I've seen plenty of conjecture on Brewers Twitter also that they wish their organization had done more at the deadline. So I think that's just a common theme no matter the team, you know.
I'm sure there's
Um,
Dodger fans doing the same thing, even though they got plenty of guys.
let's jump into the two significant Brewers trades. We'll break these down individually because it feels kind of like the right number. So the first one was an interesting one. They acquired right-handed pitcher Nick Mears from the Colorado Rockies for right-handed pitchers Bradley Blaylock and Eugenio Herrera. Um, Theo, overall thoughts on this move from the Brewers? Mears is certainly not someone who kind of came into that trade with outstanding like performance metrics on the season. So
Mhm.
curious for your take on that trade from the Brewers.
I think it will be an under the radar pick for them.
Hmm.
I mean, the Rockies are probably the seller equivalent of the Twins, where they're making the most confusing decisions, where they're
Yeah.
not selling Ryan McCann, Austin Gomber. They had so many guys they could have traded away
Yep.
to like build for the future, and they just never do it.
Bad team's
Um,
gonna stay bad.
exactly. Them and the Angels, those two. It's just but anyway, I mean, this is one of those guys where they're just like, okay, fine, we'll give him up. And I think he is, malleable for what the Brewers have been able to do for the last
Hmm.
7, 8 years with all these relievers. And like, obviously, 2018 was the real contention, but like for nearly a decade since Council like became a manager, I'm sorry, that's bad blood. I brought up his name, Brewers fans. I apologize for our listeners, but I mean, pretty much since his tenure started and ended to what it is now, I mean, they have really just been focusing real well on developing these relievers, whether they're picking them up as minor leaguers in other systems or they
Yep.
get them at the trade deadline. They find a way to make them work. So just looking at his baseball savant page, there's a lot more red than blue. He's
Hmm.
his I mean, the problem is his walk rate, he's in the bottom 23rd percentile. His chase rate's not fantastic, but I mean, his hard hit rate, he's in the top 98th percentile. That's like the thing that stands out. So like
Hmm.
when they're getting contact, it's working well. So I think there's something the Brewers can do to make him one of those stronger back end relievers. I'm not saying he's going to be the top four coming out of the bullpen. He's definitely going to
Hmm.
be someone you might see coming in sixth, seventh inning, medium to low leverage. I think that's something. And, if things go really well from him, he could move himself up to showing up in an eighth inning if, one of their top three guys is exhausted and they just need to pick me up from one of these other guys in the back end of the bullpen. So I think there's definitely a lot they can work with there, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, a couple of additional thoughts on mirrors. I pretty much agree with your breakdown is spot on, right? So as you alluded to, the peripherals outweigh the performance to this point of the season. He pretty much came up in his first media availability and said, "Oh, I found out a couple of weeks ago that I've been tipping pitches for the last 6 weeks," and so I guarantee that's something the Brewers are plugged into. We know that they're an incredibly smart organization when it comes to developing and tweaking pitchers and pitching. Also, a tolerable cost, I think, in terms of the Brewers have a ton of depth in their minor league system. Um, Honestly, this is the kind of if we compare this to the Twins relief trade, this is like medium wattage, right? To the Twins low wattage move.
Mhm.
As you alluded to, I think this is a guy who potentially works in a little bit of leverage at times, depending on how he performs. So I think a really solid pickup for the Brewers there. Their second trade is the one I want to touch on next.
Real quick,
Um, yeah,
because again, he's coming from the Rockies. We have to point out the home road splits. So
yep,
surprisingly enough, he was really good at Coors Field. 3.04 ERA in
yeah,
26 and two thirds innings, and then on the road, that's where he's been killed. 8.69 ERA in 19 and two thirds innings as a in the road out. So I think that's where he's going to have things work in his favor.
hmm.
So, I mean, it's great to get a guy who can pitch well at Coors Field, but if he's not doing the same other places, then you worry about it a bit.
I will put my money on the Brewers and Nick Mears figuring it out
Oh, yeah, I don't doubt it. But it had to be pointed out because everyone's always going to bring up, well, he was with the Rockies. How
for
well did
sure.
he do there elsewhere? It's always that connotation with getting someone from Colorado.
The Coors Field Grumbles.
Mhm.
Okay, their second trade, interesting one here. They acquired a starting pitcher, right-handed pitcher Frankie Montas of Twins meme fame from a season or two back.
Yeah,
Acquired
where
from the
Frankie? Well, I
yeah,
don't think it's meant to be.
it's not. I
No.
agree. I think we can finally bury that one, right?
Oh, yeah.
Acquired from the Reds, they sent infielder, or excuse me, they sent Joey Weimer and right-handed pitcher Jacob Junis the other way. Curious for your take on this one. A little bit of a different vibe, trading guys off the 40 man instead of prospects.
Yeah, it's an older school kinda trade, which we haven't really seen frequently in the last 10 to 15 years. Um, which I thought the Brewers overpaid a little bit because Weimer hasn't really panned out to the top prospect he used to be. I mean, the guy was just in the Futures game a year ago, but this season in only 19 games, he has looked pretty bad.
Hmm.
But I mean, Frankie Montas has not been fantastic, and he's a pure rental for the rotation. But I
Yep.
mean, he could definitely be like a Jolies Chassin for Brewers fans, like recent memory and how good he was for them. I think that was 2018, 2019. And I think that's the type of guy they can get out of Frankie Montas if his old self reappears. And it's possible. I mean, the Brewers definitely have more of a pitching pipeline working for themselves than their offense of late. But I mean,
Hmm.
even Bryce Terrain's turned it around. Sal Frelick, he's getting there. But Joey Weimer is like one of those guys where I think those expectations were definitely there for him to be one of those future infielders that really just hit it around for them, but that's just not the case. And he's going to a team in the Reds that is still packed with a lot of infield talent, young infield talent. I mean, obviously LED Cruz, Matt McLean's been out for most of the season. Same with
Hmm.
Christian and Encarnacio Strand. They still got Jonathan India, so I just found that
Noel
part of
V.
it odd.
Marte.
Yeah, well, Marte had his PED issues, but that's another story. Um, but it's crowded for him already in
Hmm.
Cincinnati. So I just don't know where he's going to fit in there, but the Reds aren't really going to be contending this year. So they got time to like play around with him and like see if he's not an infielder, if they can make him a corner outfielder like they have done with Spencer Steer.
Hmm. Yep. I like the connection to the Weimer played his college ball at Cincinnati. That's a fun one.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a good thing for him on that side of it.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see what the Brewers do with Frankie Montas. I'm sure they have some ideas on how they might tweak his pitch mix. Matt Trueblood had a good article on that up at Twins Daily, essentially throwing more sinkers to lefties and varying the location of those a little bit more. Um, something that's interesting about the Brewers' kind of approach to this deadline, and I want to ask about if you think they should have grabbed a bat, but it does seem like the reporting is that the Brewers were potentially close on a Jack Flaherty trade. And it sounds like when the kind of market for the ace level guys didn't materialize, there were more teams suddenly in the mix for Flaherty, that made the Tigers kind of pivot in different directions, and I think that became a whole convoluted thing with the Yankees and other teams.
Yeah,
So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Montes. At the very bare minimum, he'll eat some innings for them, which they've certainly struggled with the number of arms they've had on the IL this season. One kind of popular refrain, Theo, I've seen from Brewers fans in the last couple of days since the deadline, or in the last day since the deadline, is wishing they had been more aggressive in potentially acquiring some offense. Do you agree? Do you not agree? What's your take on their overall approach, like Goldilocks style? Not aggressive enough, too aggressive, or just right?
I think with Yelich not being out for the season is a huge reason why they didn't. And if he was going to be, then they definitely should have. I mean, I would say go even for Luis Robert,
Hmm.
but White Sox backed out on him. I was surprised they backed out on Garrett Crochet.
Oh,
I
their
thought
trade deadline was
between
wild.
them, between Crochet and Scooble, I mean, Crochet was like the more obvious to deal because I mean, with the Tigers, Flaherty, he's a rental, but you want to
Hmm.
cash in on that, but and you can still have Scooble for next season and likely contend. Like, why would you give up someone who's going to be a top three finishing in the American League Cy Young voting?
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's odd But I think, one guy we haven't mentioned, because he was acquired a couple weeks ago, was Aaron Savali, who's made 4 starts for them. Been decent. I mean,
Mhm.
he's looked a little bit better than he was with Tampa. I mean, so they have that rotation depth now between Savali and Montas, and
Yep.
obviously Woodruff, who they re-signed this offseason, is not going to be back till next year. So they needed 2 guys like that to kind of fill things out for Freddie Peralta,
Yep.
and Colin Ray, who has really surprised me with them and been outstanding. So, yeah, I mean, I think they have to put a lot more pressure now on Willie Adames and Reese Hoskins to get things clicking while um, Yelich is out. And Yelich has been fantastic for them all season. I mean, Adames
Mhm.
has been a great power hitter. I know Hoskins missed an entire season. That definitely has effect on some of his performance this year. But I mean, he's had his good moments too. So it's going to be a matter of some of those younger guys sticking up to. I mean, Bryce Train's already done it all season. Sal Frelick's, now's the time for him to do so. Full throttle, be that guy everyone expected you to be. And Joey Ortiz has been a nice surprise too. I think he will be so. And if they can get someone like Tyler Black called back up, or Oliver Dunn, some of those guys to not really Oliver Dunn. I don't know why I just read his name off when I think I meant someone else. But Tyler Black is definitely someone who, if he gets things clicking right in the minors, could definitely make some down the stretch impact, maybe in September when the rosters
Yeah.
expand.
Yeah, for me, I think I wish the Brewers had been a little bit more aggressive. 5-game lead as of right this second in the NL Central. They're locked to make the playoffs pretty much. Um, I do think there's a decent amount of parity, and like baseball playoffs are ridiculous every year, no matter what,
Yeah.
right? But you look at some of the teams that we talked about in our preseason preview: Atlanta, no Ronald Acuna Jr., no Spencer Strider. Um, I think it's
And they're
kind of
bringing
wide.
back the old cast of
Yeah, they
2021 on
are.
this trade deadline.
Yeah, they are. I think given that the Brewers have a top 10 farm system in baseball, I think I wish they had tried to improve the ceiling a little bit, because I think they would make the playoffs regardless of if they made any of these moves.
Mhm.
That said, plenty more aggressive than the Twins. So on the sliding scale, it's better. Let's jump over to the Cubs. We'll do the Cubs in a little bit of a different format just because they were more busy.
Mhm.
And one thing that the Cubs did just before we recap these names that I really liked is they're helping us put to bed this idea of a team as just a buyer or a seller, which I think we can kind of throw out at this point, right?
Yeah.
That they're team building, and the Cubs are a great demonstration of that, because they acquired pieces for the future, and they move some pieces out, maybe not as many as you might think, in such a strong sellers market. So incoming names: third baseman Isaac Paredes from the Rays, right-handed pitcher and former super hyped prospect Nate Pearson from the Toronto Blue Jays, right-handed pitcher Jack Neely, and infielder Ben Cowles. And out third baseman, I'll call him tentatively Christopher Morel to the Rays, right-handed pitcher Mark Leiter Jr. He got traded to the Yankees. Hunter
Mhm.
Biggie and Ty Johnson also went to the Rays. Outfielder Yohendrick Piniago and infielder Josh Rivera. So let's start with the guys that they brought in, because I do think it was interesting what the Cubs started to do with a view to 2025 and beyond. Theo, who stood out to you the most of guys that they brought in?
I think it's definitely Isak Paredes. I mean, that guy's been killing it for Tampa this year. Guy's first All Star nod, and now he's coming in full. Unlike Morale, he's got his position set. He's going to be their
Mhm.
corner infield guy, and I mean, he can really do a lot of damage and be a fan favorite of the Wrigley faithful going forward here. So I
Yep.
think there's a lot to like about that addition. I also think Nate Pearson, I mean, he's going to be a career reliever now, but I think, him getting a change of scenery, that could also be to his advantage. I know game one with the Cubs did not go off to a great start.
It was interesting.
Yeah. But, at that rate, you can only go up from there. So I think both those guys definitely plan for the future. I think it's fair to say they're out of this postseason contention because they're tied for
Mhm.
last with the Reds right now, even though they were crushing them. I think last I looked at that score tonight, it's 9-3 Cubs. But I think it's both the same. I think Tampa's got a leg up, but they were both the two teams in this trade down the line who were like, retooling for contention now, or even just waiting another year, which is not that bad or not that long a time frame.
Yep.
Tampa, I think them getting Christopher Morel, they're gonna finally find him a position and not have him in such a crowded infield that he can
Mhm.
finally find a place to be comfortable, where he's going to have more of an advantage to his fielding abilities than third base has been for him with the Cubs. So I think that was just a good swap for swap. We're going to take these guys who we know we can get their strikes out of, and that's going to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great assessment. I agree on Paredes. Like, I think just so much being made of his, like, pulled fly ball events in
Mhm.
Tropicana, and how that wouldn't translate to Wrigley, and I just, like, can we give it a week or 2, and not couch our whole analysis in one, like, expected home run stat?
Mhm.
Um, but I pretty much agree with everything that you said, and I like that comparison that you pulled up between the Rays and the Cubs, because the Rays did what I thought the Cubs might do more, which is to
Yeah.
say, "Dang, we're getting prices that we like, and people are being aggressive. We're on the cusp of contention," and the Rays is certainly more on the cusp than the Cubs, but let's, like, lean into selling and really ratchet up what we can get for our saleable assets. And I was a little bit surprised that the Cubs didn't lean more into selling. Um,
Yeah, I think I was a bit too, because like Jamison Tyon is someone who
right.
probably could have fetched them a fair price. I mean, I Patrick Wisdom might be a fan favorite, but like Michael Bush is the future at first base, and now you have
Mhm,
Isak Paredes secured at third base. So you could have moved him, even though it could have been just like a mid-level minor leaguer, someone who's in like the top 10 or 20 range of, well,
mhm,
10 to 20 range of your system. That could have been the possibility, but um, they're going to go with it. And they still made some decent trades, but not like Tampa. I mean, the big difference is Tampa Bay is 4.5 out of the American League wild card spot
mhm.
and 2 games above 500, while the Cubs are 6.5 out of the final wild card spot and 6 games below 500. So it's fair to say the Cubs made the right moves now that they don't have to panic to worry about for the offseason, because these operators is going to be there for a couple more seasons at least. And I think
Yep.
next season, and that's the thing. I think there's definitely a lot more frustration for Cubs fans, because it's like you had these expectations of competing this year. It's been mediocre. You still got some guys you can like, but are they enough to get you to the precipice of that final wild card spot at
Mhm.
worst? Probably not. I mean, you're gonna have to have a lot of things like clicking right to get to that point, but it's not
So
looking
much
optimistic.
traffic right above them in the NL wild card,
Hmm.
like, right? We talked a little bit about the AL wild card, which is really 5 teams for 3 spots, and the NL wild card, there's, like, 7. I'm sure you probably have it up in front of you. There's, like, 7
I
teams
do.
above the
I
Cubs.
mean, it's literally everyone
Brutal.
except the Nationals, Marlins, and Rockies. Like
Okay.
all the other teams, like mathematically speaking, have a chance
Mhm.
from the Cubs on up, and that's what, three, six. That's 9 teams. That's it's everything's gonna trickle down, and like we're gonna see the real contenders from the teams that have just been floating there,
Yep.
um, real quick over the next month. And unfortunately, I believe the Cubs are going to be one of those teams, but I have more optimistic outlooks for where they're going to start the 2024-25 offseason compared to some other teams like our beloved Minnesota Twins.
Yeah, sad day. You wouldn't think from interacting with other Twins fans on social media that the Twins were in the second wild card spot at the end of today. Certainly
Man,
doesn't feel
we
that
didn't
way.
even think they were running with the division this time last year
I
with how
know,
Twins
right?
Twitter was.
Yeah,
So
this is
don't
true.
base everything off that. Yes, your frustrations are valid, whether you're a fan of any of our 3 teams, but I'm
Yeah,
specifically talking to our Twins listeners. But find a better way to put those frustrations. I'm not saying you don't have to like the Polads right now. You don't. But just find a better way to put those frustrations out
there
there.
you go. You know who you are.
Yeah.
All right, dude. So that was fun, man. That was a good recap of those 3 teams.
Hmm.
Um, we're gonna finish up with a quick question. It's come up a few times in the last week or so since the
Yeah.
the draft got done. Josiah asked, when are we going to see draft picks playing games and assigned out to affiliates? And it's interesting. There's an increasing kind of dichotomy of major league organizations and how they handle their draft guys. Travis Bazzana hit his first professional home run for Cleveland, for the Cleveland organization today, Grand Slam. There's a chunk of teams that get guys out right away. And the Cubs
Mhm.
certainly fall into that bucket. The signing deadline for draft picks is tomorrow. Um, the big one to watch for the three teams that we cover is Chris Lavonis. The Brewers pick from
I wanna say that was 3rd round.
Comp B, maybe. It's either Comp B or the
Comp B.
third
No, it was
round.
Comp B. It was Comp
Okay.
B, yep. I wrote that. I mean, I wrote it up, I should know.
All indicators are that he is not going to sign. That is a big miss for the Brewers in terms of signability, in my opinion. We'll jump back to that if we get there. But in terms of your question, Josiah, which I think you're mostly referring to Twins players, um, signing deadlines tomorrow. Twins have two guys unsigned. We'll see if they manage to get those guys signed to deals. If not, they will have signed 20 out of their 22 players. Hitters, you can expect to see soon, like the next couple of weeks.
Mhm.
Pitchers, I think, do not expect to see them in 2024, especially your intriguing prep arm and Desan Hill. After the Twins draft, they all go down to Fort Myers. They do kind of a post draft camp, and then they go to Instructs. Um, the Twins are usually very, very cautious with workloads for pitchers after being drafted, but I think you can expect to see Galen Culpepper, Kyle DeBarge, those guys jumping into game
Billy
action.
Akins.
Yep, Billy Amick. Yep, all those guys should be playing in the next couple of weeks, and it'll be exciting, man. We'll get our first look at them as pros. So probably
Well,
middle of August.
we also have to mention a lot more Twins fans will have an easier time making a road trip to see Walker Jenkins since he did get
There you
promoted up to
go,
Cedar Rapids High A.
dude.
Um, I don't. I mean, I'd say for all our listeners who definitely want to catch that minor league action, I mean, go see him now because we don't know what's going to happen over the next 2 months and if
Sure don't.
he is going to have a short stay down there and
Yeah.
start the season elsewhere next year as in Double
Dude,
A.
that's
So,
exciting. This is why I'm excited to
mhm,
jump back into minor league stuff because we've missed so much.
I
You're
know.
sitting in front of Zebby Matthews pitching at AAA now. We've got Walker Jenkins up. Ricardo Olivar has been promoted to Double A. There's all kinds going on in the Twins minor league system. Um, Excited to jump back into that. We will call it a
Yeah.
day there for today. Just want to finish with some closing housekeeping.
Well, before we do that, I also want to plug our most recently published piece as of
Oh yeah.
recording on Twins Daily. Jimmy, you did a phenomenal job with
Oh,
this. This is
thanks,
like
dude.
one of the best features we have had in a long while on Ivan Romero, one of the drafted free agent signings the Twins had back in June. 22-year-old kid, just a phenomenal story about him and his father's love for the game. I think a lot of us writers who got a sneak peek at it early had a few tears in our eyes at the end. And
Nah, I appreciate that,
I'm
dude.
feeling the choke up um, just talking about it because I mean, you definitely got to read it for yourselves and understand, the emotional appeal behind this and what this moment means, even as an undrafted free agent for these kids to get these opportunities. So
Yeah.
go read that. Had to plug it. It was just too good not to.
Thanks, dude. I really appreciate it. Yeah,
You're
that was
welcome.
Ivan Romero. Really, really great kid, great family. There's a piece, as Theo mentioned, up there on Twins Daily at the moment. Check it out. It is a human interest baseball story about a family that I think if you enjoy this podcast, you will like. Um, all right, we're gonna call it a day for today. Just some quick housekeeping to finish. I want to thank folks for all of their support since the draft, including the draft, since the draft, all that good stuff. Just some friendly reminders. You can get in touch with the show, follow the show. We're on Twitter at DTS_pod1. You can also find us on YouTube. We put all of our episodes up there as well as some shorter videos that we make for the websites. That's at Destination the Show, all one word, on YouTube. If you got a question for us, you can always email the show. It's destinationtheshow@gmail.com. And anything you can do to support the show, whether that is downloading an episode, retweeting it, Anything like that helps us to grow the show, get it in more ears. And we sincerely appreciate it. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you find your podcasts. Until next week, you guys enjoy the baseball. We'll catch you next time.